Hey guys, tonight we are going to delve into a little told, yet incredibly dramatic, corner of the Tudor dynasty. The story of two princesses caught in a political whirlwind, Margaret and Mary, the elder sister and younger sister of the infamous King Henry VIII. The world only remembers the heads that fell and Henry's noisy divorces. But did you know that these two women, despite their delicate appearances, held the key to the destiny of both England and Scotland? Margaret was married off to the northern enemy, becoming a battlefield widow when her husband fell by the sword of her own younger brother Henry VIII. Mary desperately fought against a marriage to an old king, and was ready to gamble both her life and honour to follow the call of a secret love. They were royal pawns being manipulated, but they recklessly flipped the board of fate themselves. Their lives are testament to the fact that, even in the gilded cage of Tudor, greed, betrayal, and the thirst for freedom burned just as fiercely as any war. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. The night is late, and I want to know where you are following this stormy historical journey from. What time is it where you are right now? Please comment to let me know the city you are in and the current local time. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. And before we delve into the lives of Margaret and Mary, sisters of Henry VIII, let us return to the reign of their father, King Henry VII. Under his wise hand, and alongside Queen Elizabeth of York, the Tudor dynasty united the houses of Lancaster and York, bore 7 children, and endured both moments of glory and moments of tragic sorrow. The story of the 3 eldest children, Elizabeth, Edmund, and Arthur, will reveal the firm foundation as well as the shadows behind the splendour upon which Margaret and Mary's destinies were later built. Now, let us explore the radiant yet sorrowful early days of the family of Henry VII. The story begins in the year 1485, when Henry Tudor defeated Richard III at Bosworth to claim the throne as Henry VII. On August 22nd, 1485, the Lancastrian banner rose triumphant over the field, and England, worn by years of dynastic struggle, breathed its first sigh of unity. In the quiet days that followed, Henry took as his Queen Elizabeth of York, daughter of the fallen White Rose, seeking to heal the wounds that had divided Lancaster and York. Their marriage, held with solemn grace at Westminster Abbey, was no mere celebration of young love, but a deliberate pledge to bind 2 rival houses into one harmonious realm. In the gentle hush of Greenwich Palace, this royal union blossomed into a family of 9. Queen Elizabeth bore Henry 7 children, 4 daughters and 3 sons, each born beneath the watchful eyes of devoted courtiers. One might imagine a softly painted portrait, the king in velvet of deepest crimson, the queen in brocade of muted rose, and their little ones kneeling before an image of St. George, patron saint of England. This tableau spoke of prosperity and affection, of a home wrapped in sanctity and affection under the mantle of divine protection. From the earliest dawn of their reign, Henry and Elizabeth devoted themselves to the care and education of their offspring. The young princes, robed in kneeling gowns, sat at polished oak desks, quills in hand, translating Latin texts and pondering moral philosophy with solemn intent. Soft candlelight flickered along the walls as tutors guided them through lessons in rhetoric and statecraft, their voices a gentle murmur against the hush of the palace. Meanwhile, the princesses learned the arts of womanly refinement, their small feet tracing intricate steps in the great hall as they practiced courtly dance, their slender fingers weaving silken threads through the frames of embroidery, and their minds absorbing lessons in etiquette, so that one day they might preside with dignity as Queen's consort. Yet the Tudors' court was not all study and stitchwork. Under Henry's prudent governance, the palace doors swung wide for many entertainments, hundreds of diversions that filled the corridors with music and laughter. Minstrels plucked lutes beneath shadowed arches, and jesters tumbled upon lawns carpeted in dew. The clang of armour gave way to the hush of cards, and the swift chase of greyhounds racing across verdant fields. Each pastime wove a delicate thread of joy into the tapestry of royal life. No season glimmered more brightly than Christmas at Greenwich. On Christmas Eve, the king's coffers opened wide, importing wines from Bordeaux and spices from the Levant. Roast venison and boar, glazed with honey and fragrant herbs, were piled on silver platters. Confections spun of sugar and almonds glinted like gems beneath the candlelight. Jugglers spun plates upon polished floors, and acrobats executed feats of grace that drew gasps from noble spectators. Gifts wrapped in satin and velvet travelled from small hands to awaiting arms, weaving memories of merriment into the hush of winter's breath. Yet beneath this gleaming surface lay sorrow as fragile as frost upon a windowpane. In the autumn of 1489, Princess Elizabeth, firstborn of the Queen, succumbed to a sudden fever at the tender age of 3, her laughter fading like the last notes of a lullaby. The hush of mourning descended upon the palace, and corridors once bright with her footsteps lay quiet. The following spring, young Edmund slipped away at 15 months old, his brief life a whisper in the king's heart. Then, in the winter of 1491, Prince Arthur, heir to Wales, was claimed by the sweating sickness at age 14, his promise extinguished beneath a veil of grief. As if fate's hand had not struck deeply enough, Queen Elizabeth herself fell to childbed fever in the early spring of 1492, delivering Princess Catherine before her own breath failed. The infant Catherine lived only a few fleeting days, leaving the royal household wrapped in silence deeper than any they had known. King Henry, heavy of heart, drew into a sombre reserve. His purse grew tight, and he turned from the drums of war. In lieu of battle's roar, he negotiated the Treaty of Perpetual Peace with France and with Scotland, an accord inked in hope of economic calm rather than triumph on the field. From these bittersweet beginnings emerged the faint silhouettes of 2 little princesses, Margaret and Mary, born into the shadow of their brother's reign and the echo of vanished siblings. Their childhood, woven from both regal splendour and hushed sorrow, would lay the foundation for their journeys into duty's quiet demands and the gentle pursuit of joy beneath the weight of history. To end the 170 years of enmity between England and Scotland, King Henry VII arranged the marriage of his eldest daughter, Princess Margaret, then just 13 years old, to King James IV of Scotland, who was 27 years her senior. Many English councillors raised anxious protests, fearing that the Scottish crown might one day claim the English throne. Yet Henry remained untroubled, confident that England would remain the dominant power in Britain. Preparations for the wedding were lavish and meticulously planned. In the winter of 1501, Margaret's wardrobe was delivered to Greenwich Palace. Gowns of Italian silk adorned with the red Lancastrian rose, and bed hangings of crimson velvet embroidered with the same emblem. The formal betrothal, the Treaty of Perpetual Peace, was signed on January 17, 1502, sealing a truce for the first time in 2 centuries. Then, on August 28, 1502, Margaret set out northward in a grand procession that lasted the entire month of August. Crossing the border into Scotland, she was received with solemn ceremony at Berwick-upon-Tweed. Nobles in fur-trimmed cloaks knelt before her carriage, and heralds announced her arrival with silver trumpets. A week later, in the hallowed aisles of Holyrood Abbey, the Archbishop of Glasgow and the Archbishop of York stood side by side as King James IV and Princess Margaret exchanged vows. According to 16th century law, a marriage was only deemed consummated once the couple shared a bed. Thus, that very night, they lay together in the royal chamber to sanctify their union, though, out of deference to her youth, James did not approach her again until her 17th birthday. Despite their 16-year age difference, the young couple found warmth in each other's company. James, enamoured of his bride, named his greatest warship the Margaret, while the Queen decorated her quarters with rare Flemish tapestries and her prized violet-scented powders. She arrived in Scotland with a retinue of 24 attendants, including 2 African sisters, Ellen and Margaret More, whose presence symbolised the reach and diversity of the Scottish court. In the spring of 1508, at the age of 17, Queen Margaret gave birth to her first child, a son named James, on April 29th. The joy of motherhood was tragically short-lived. The infant prince grew frail and passed away just days before his first birthday, his tiny hand slipping from hers amid prayers and tears. The following year, on March 22nd, 1509, she delivered a daughter, but the newborn likewise lived only a brief few weeks, leaving Margaret's heart heavy with grief. That same spring, on April 21st, 1509, King Henry VII died at Richmond Palace. His son, Henry VIII, ascended the English throne at the age of 18, and swiftly abandoned his father's peace-first policy in favour of martial glory. By the summer of 1510, he was at war with France, a traditional ally of Scotland, while James IV seized the opportunity to invade northern England. With her husband across the border, Queen Margaret, now a young widow at the age of 24, stepped into the breach. She marshalled the remaining Scottish forces in coordination with Catherine of Aragon, the Queen of England, who had led the English army north. Together they met the Scots at the Battle of Flodden on September 9th, 15013. The clash was one of the bloodiest in the British Isles. The Scottish phalanx was routed, and King James IV fell in battle, becoming the last monarch of either realm to die on the field. In the aftermath, Queen Catherine sent her brother-in-law's blood-soaked coat to Henry VIII as a grim trophy. Meanwhile, in Edinburgh, the widowed Queen Margaret was appointed regent for her surviving infant son, the new King James V, with the caveat that she must not remarry. Thus began her rule over Scotland in her own right, a rare and formidable exercise of female sovereignty in the age of chivalry, built upon the fragile truce first forged by her grandfather Henry VII. Upon assuming the heavy mantle of regency in her early 20s, Queen Margaret found her authority tested by those who distrusted a woman's hand on the levers of power. Already mother to 6 children and recovering from the birth of her 7th, she returned to Edinburgh only to discover powerful nobles demanding a more suitable guardian for the young king. Some factions pressed for the Duke of Albany himself, closer in male lineage, to replace her. Yet Margaret, mindful of her brother Henry VIII's support and armed with her own diplomatic grace, navigated the court's restless currents. She brokered compromises among rival houses and reminded council members that her position as elder sister of England's king lent her unique sway. Thus did she, through tact and tenacity, retain the regency for her son. But her tender heart led her into perilous ambitions of a different sort. In secret, she wed Archibald Douglas, the Earl of Angus, a charismatic noble scorned by some as more interested in titles than in genuine power. The clandestine ceremony, performed without council consent, shattered the fragile trust upon which her rule rested. Overnight, Albany's supporters seized the moment. They declared her marriage invalid and stripped her of the regency. Her husband, emboldened, demanded that she surrender her 2 young sons into the Duke's care. Though Albany was reputed kinder than Richard III had ever been, Margaret dared not resist, and she yielded her boys, then only toddlers, to his guardianship. In the months that followed, tragedy struck again when her youngest son, Prince Alexander, succumbed to infant illness at 16 months. Whispered rumours of poison drifted through the marble halls, but no proof ever surfaced to stain the court's annals. Isolated and betrayed in the land of her birth, Margaret carried within her the life of her 8th child. Under cover of night, she slipped away northward, then eastward, escaping to the sanctuary of England. Along the journey, she gave birth to a daughter, also named Margaret, cradled in the secrecy of midwives' hands. When at last she reached London, her brother Henry VIII welcomed her with grand ceremony. He installed her at Scotland Yard, the ancient residence of Scottish monarchs now serving as a regal refuge in England's heart. There, Margaret found solace in the companionship of her brother and his queen, Catherine of Aragon. Yet a year later, cold politics summoned her back across the North Sea. Albany, ever eager to reclaim her forfeited authority, invited her return with the promise of reinstating her as regent. Trusting his assurances, Margaret journeyed north once more. Upon her arrival in Edinburgh, however, she discovered that Archibald Douglas had squandered her treasury on his own pleasures, and had even sheltered his mistress within her former palace chambers. Outraged and betrayed anew, Margaret penned a private plea to Henry VIII, asking him to assist in obtaining a divorce. Her brother, though counselled that marriage was divinely ordained, sympathised with her plight. He advised her to seek personal justice while cautioning against biblical transgression. In the years that followed, Margaret watched her eldest surviving son, James, grow into boyhood. When he reached the age of 12, she acted with resolve. Gathering loyal lords and gentlewomen, she orchestrated a peaceful coup. In a swift council session, Parliament declared the young king of age to rule in his own right. Margaret secured her own position as his chief counsellor, and Albany was expelled from the regency. Thus did Margaret, through strategy born of both maternal love and royal duty, regain the power that had been wrenched from her grasp. And so, in the hush of twilight, the story of Queen Margaret's regency unfolds an intricate tapestry of duty, devotion, and defiance, woven in the quiet hours between dawn and dusk. It is here, amid whispered counsels and solemn vows, that we glimpse the strength of a woman who would not yield her crown to neither ambition nor betrayal. In the summer of 1528, a fragile calm in Scotland was shattered when Archibald Douglas, Earl of Angus, returned at the head of a royal army. Word spread like a slow sigh through the great halls. Douglas's men encircled Stirling Castle, and before the dawn had fully broken, the young King James was seized and held captive under the Earl's watchful guard. For 3 years, from 1528 until 1531, Angus ruled in the king's stead, guiding council meetings and issuing proclamations in the name of the 16-year-old monarch. Queen Margaret, now bereft of her regency and heart aching from the loss of her youngest son, felt the weight of duty press upon her chest. In her quiet hours, she penned a desperate petition to Rome, invoking an unusual claim. Since James IV had survived the bloody fields of Flodden by slipping into common robes for 3 years, she argued, his continued existence meant that her first marriage to Douglas had been unlawfully contracted not before her sovereign brother, but in secret, beneath an outdated understanding of royal consent. Though scholars found no precedent for such a claim, the nuance of canonical law and a generous offering to the papal coffers swayed the mind of the Holy Father. In the early spring of 1529, the Pope declared Margaret's marriage to Archibald Douglas null and void, restoring her status as a free woman of royal blood. Barely had word of this triumph reached her when Margaret moved swiftly to secure her personal future. On January 6, 1530, she wed Henry Stuart, Master of the Royal Artillery, a handsome courtier whose bright smile masked a propensity for lavish spending. Queen Margaret transferred her remaining jewels and funds to her new husband, only to find them dispersed among his mistresses and gambling debts within months. Meanwhile, in Edinburgh, the young King James, no longer a puppet of Angus, asserted his authority with youthful vigour. At 16, on April 29, 1524, he convened the Estates of Parliament, deposing Archibald Douglas from the regency and appointing Henry Stuart as Lord Methven. He then insisted that his mother's marriage be dissolved, restoring her dignity even as he urged her to remain at his side as chief counsellor. Despite these political reversals, Margaret nurtured a quiet hope that her son might one day wed her niece, Mary Tudor, daughter of Henry VIII. Such an alliance would bind England and Scotland anew, and perhaps ease the centuries-old rivalries that still smouldered across the border. Yet neither the English king nor his nephew showed interest in such a grand meeting. James chose instead to cement his realm's ties with France, marrying Mary of Guise, daughter of the Duke of Lorraine, in the spring of 1548, deepening the Franco-Scottish alliance that would later bear bitter fruit. In the waning years of her life, Margaret split her time between Holyrood Palace and London, where her bond with the English court remained tender. Her brother Henry welcomed her counsel, and Catherine of Aragon, once her sister-in-law, offered her kindness and sanctuary. Yet peace proved elusive. On October 27, 1541, amid a gentle autumnal haze, Margaret suffered a sudden stroke. At the age of 51, she passed quietly in her sleep, her life's tapestry woven of both triumph and sorrow. With her passing, the fragile bond that had held England and Scotland in cautious harmony unravelled. King James, now free of his mother's moderating presence, abandoned hopes of joint rule. He launched a campaign against England's northern shires only months later, his ambition undimmed even as fate claimed him. In the spring of 1537, the king fell ill and died at the age of 30, leaving the crown to his only surviving child, Mary Stuart, just 6 days old. Thus closed the final chapter of Margaret's story, a tale born of treaties and tragedies, of secret prayers to Rome, and secret marriages by torchlight. Her life, entwined with the fate of 2 kingdoms, fulfilled the vision her grandfather had sown a century earlier, that the blood of Lancaster and York might forge a path to unity, even amid the darkest shadows of loss. Mary Tudor, the second younger sister of Henry VIII, was born on March 18, 1496, precisely 5 years after her brother's birth in 1491. From her earliest days at Greenwich Palace, she was delicate of health, prone to fevers and lingering coughs that doctors of the era found difficult to treat. Yet renowned scholars, such as Erasmus, remarked upon her striking beauty, hair as dark as midnight velvet, and eyes of soft, storm-tossed grey. In the hush of her childhood chambers, servants would recall how her quiet cough would mingle with the rustle of silken gowns and the muted tinkle of distant harpsichord notes. By the summer of 1514, Mary had reached the age of 18, and her life took a solemn turn under the dictates of dynastic diplomacy. To secure peace with France, whose banners had long clashed with England's King Henry VIII, arranged her marriage to King Louis XII, then 52 years old. The wedding took place on October 9th, 1514, in the Great Hall of Saint-Denis, amid tapestries of rich scarlet and gold. Young Mary, dressed in a gown of French brocade trimmed with ermine, accepted her fate with measured grace, though her heart secretly yearned for freedom. King Louis, besotted by his youthful bride, attended with fervent but brief devotion. Yet time proved a harsher companion than love. On January 1st, 1515, scarcely 3 months after their vows, Louis XII succumbed to an acute attack of gout, though many whispered of age-worn frailty rather than intrigue. His passing left Mary a queen in title but childless in hope, her expectation of bearing a future monarch unfulfilled. Isolated at Fontainebleau for 7 lingering months, she found herself surrounded by courtiers whose laughter echoed hollowly through marble corridors. When at last she departed France in the late summer of 1515, Mary was no richer for titles, but keenly aware of her own constrained choices. She returned to England beneath a canopy of delicate silk, hopeful that her brother, the new king, would grant her the right to choose her own next companion. Henry, in the tumult of his throne and the demands of court, had promised that upon her widowhood she might marry again to her liking, yet the promise slipped quietly from his mind beneath the roar of his ambitions. Instead, Henry summoned Charles Brandon, the Duke of Suffolk, and a close friend of the crown, to fetch his sister from the shores of Normandy. Brandon arrived on August 1st, 1515, bearing royal letters prohibiting marriage. He swore his oath to keep faith. Yet before the ink had dried upon the parchment, he and Mary had fallen into a hidden romance. In the hush of night aboard their returning vessel, they wed in secret, bound by shared laughter and whispered vows. Such an act, under Tudor law, amounted to high treason. Yet when Henry learned of their union that very autumn, he could not bring himself to harshly punish either participant. Instead, he imposed a grievous fine of £24,000, a sum equivalent to nearly £7 million today, stripping the couple of gifts and dower lands while allowing them to remain at court. At Westhorpe Hall in Suffolk, Mary and Charles found a measure of domestic solace. They welcomed 4 children, 2 sons, Henry and Charles, and 2 daughters, Anne and Mary, though only 2 of these offspring survived to adulthood. Mary also nurtured the 2 daughters Charles had fathered in his first marriage, weaving them into the fabric of her affectionate household. Within the gilded courts of England, Mary's presence was a balm to those who remembered her as a princess and now as a duchess. She delighted in dance, often joining masquerades where she moved beneath a carved mask, her laughter ringing soft as a lullaby. Yet beneath her mirth lay a steadfast loyalty to her brother. She voiced her disapproval of his plan to divorce Catherine of Aragon and met Anne Boleyn, once her maid of honour in France, with a cool reserve born of past loyalties. On June 25th, 1533, at the age of 37, Mary was stricken by a sudden attack of the sweating sickness. Despite the ministrations of court physicians, she slipped into unconsciousness and died just hours later. King Henry VIII, grief-stricken, commanded a funeral of state, draping the Abbey of St. Edmundsbury in sable and silver. There, among vaulted arches where sunlight danced on stained glass, her body was laid to rest. Thus end the days of Mary Tudor, sister of kings, daughter of dynastic union, and duchess of her own choosing. Alongside her sister Margaret, she bore the burdens of royal duty and the sharp edges of political sacrifice. Their stories, intertwined with loss and fleeting joy, stand as poignant companions to the tales of Henry VIII's 6 queens, echoing with both the promise and the tragedy that marked the Tudor years. After the untimely death of Mary Tudor on June 25, 1533, her brother King Henry VIII could not quite fill the void left by his beloved sister. Yet political necessity soon called him back to dynastic strategy. Meanwhile, in the soft cloisters of the French court, a tiny princess grew into a determined young woman. Mary Stuart, daughter of Margaret Tudor, Queen of Scotland, had been born on December 8, 1542, mere weeks after her father, King James V, perished of fever. She was carried away to France as an infant, cradled in the arms of Catherine de' Medici, and betrothed at the age of 6 to the Dauphin Francis. Though raised far from her native land, Mary received word of England's shifting tides through secret letters between her and her cousin, King Henry VIII. Unlike her elder sisters Margaret and Mary Tudor, Mary Stuart displayed a spark of leadership early on. She learned statecraft alongside lessons in song and dance, and she vowed that one day the House of Stuart would stand again among Europe's foremost dynasties. At the age of 13, on August 19, 1556, Mary set sail from Calais for Scotland, returning to claim her birthright. The journey was solemn, each wave beneath the ship's hull, a soft whisper of the country she had never truly known. Yet upon landing at Leith, she was greeted by mixed welcomes. Some nobles cherished the prospect of a queen who might restore Catholic rights. Others, inflamed by the fiery sermons of John Knox, feared she would undo the nascent Protestant Reformation. Despite the murmurs in the kirk and the courts, Mary moved to find balance between faith and politics. On July 29, 1566, at Holyrood Palace, she wed her cousin Henry Stuart, Lord Darnley, an alliance engineered to strengthen her claim to both Scottish and English thrones. The ceremony was lavish, with torches lining the marble halls and lutes lamenting in minor chords. Yet the marriage proved disastrous. Darnley's jealousy and tempestuous temper soon overshadowed their union. His violent outbursts and disregard for courtly decorum sowed discord, and Mary's longing for genuine partnership went unfulfilled. Tensions peaked on the night of February 10, 1567, when, under shadowed and suspicious circumstances, Lord Darnley was found dead in the gardens of Kirk-a-Field. Rumours swirled that Mary herself had sanctioned the deed. Others whispered that she had lacked the power to protect her husband. In the uproar that followed, rival lords demanded her abdication. Faced with rebellion and desperate to preserve her throne, Mary turned to James Hepburn, Earl of Bothwell, a man widely suspected of orchestrating Darnley's murder. On May 15, 1567, she married Bothwell in a swift ceremony at Holyrood, hoping to secure her safety and her crown. But her actions betrayed the fragile loyalty of her subjects. Within weeks, a faction of nobles rose against her, seizing her at Carbery Hill and forcing her imprisonment at Loch Leven Castle. Behind the grey towers of Loch Leven, under guard and in shackles, Mary penned her abdication. She surrendered the crown on July 24, 1567, in favour of her infant son, James, now King James VI of Scotland, at barely 1 year old, yet her spirit remained unbroken. In a daring winter escape on May 2, 1568, she fled across the border into England, seeking aid from her cousin Elizabeth, Queen of England. Elizabeth, wary of her cousin's claim and mindful of her own precarious seat, chose not to restore Mary to power. Instead, she confined her to the cold walls of Coventry and later to Chartley, under gentle guard but harsh isolation. For the next 18 years, Mary became the emblem of English Catholics, a living standard around which plots and schemes coalesced most infamously, the Babington Plot of 1586. At last, on February 8, 1587, Mary Stuart's long ordeal reached its tragic end. Accused of treason, she was led to the scaffold at Fotheringhay Castle. In the chill air before dawn, the Queen knelt, her black gown rustling like a lullaby in the wind. With a final prayer, she surrendered her head to the executioner's blade. Thus closed the life of Mary Stuart, princess, queen, prisoner, and martyr. Though her reign spanned but 6 turbulent years, her legacy endured in her son's future as James I of England, uniting the crowns of Scotland and England, as her grandfather Henry VII had envisioned nearly 150 years before. Her story, woven of ambition, devotion, and sorrow, reflects the perilous path of royal women in an age of shifting faith and relentless power. After the downfall and tragic death of Mary Stuart, young James, son of Queen Margaret and King James V, grew up beneath the watchful eyes of Scotland's nobility. His parents' shattered union and the court's turbulence cast long shadows, yet James received a meticulous education, befitting a future monarch. Tutors guided him through the subtleties of diplomacy, scripture, and the classics, while poets and musicians introduced him to the graces of art and verse. In the spring of 1603, when Queen Elizabeth I passed away without an heir, murmurs of succession swept across England and Scotland. At the age of 37, King James VI of Scotland was invited to claim the English throne uniting the crowns of England and Scotland in a personal union that fulfilled the vision Henry VII had set in motion more than a century earlier. On May 1st, 1603, James was proclaimed King James I of England and Ireland, as well as King of Scotland, establishing what courtiers would soon call the Crown of Great Britain. Ho! Yet this newly forged unity faced strains from cultural and religious differences that ran deep. James sought to reconcile the Anglican Church of England with Scotland's Presbyterian Kirk. He issued the King James Version of the Bible in 1611, a Faustus of Scripture authorized for use in English churches, and convened ecclesiastical commissions to balance episcopal authority with presbyterial governance. In parallel, he lavished patronage upon the arts, inviting William Shakespeare and Ben Jonson to grace his court with poetry and plays. These flourishes gave rise to a literary golden age, yet beneath the velvet curtains, tensions between Parliament and Crown authority began to simmer. Determined to strengthen alliances across Europe, James rekindled the practice of dynastic marriage. In 1611, he summoned European princes and princesses to court to seek a suitable bride for his eldest surviving son, Prince Charles. Diplomats devised match proposals from Germany to Spain, hoping to weave Britain into continental power networks. Then, in the night of November 5th, 1605, the shadow of conspiracy struck the heart of James's reign. A band of disaffected Catholics, led by Guy Fawkes, stockpiled barrels of gunpowder beneath the Houses of Parliament with the intent to blow skyward the king and his ministers. The plot was discovered just before dawn, and Fawkes's capture shook the realm. In the aftermath, James enforced stringent measures against Catholic recusants. Priests were hunted, masses were forbidden, and fines for non-attendance at Anglican services grew steep. These reprisals bred resentment, casting a long pall over religious life in Britain. During James's reign, English ambitions reached across the Atlantic and beyond. In 1609, the Virginia Company established Jamestown, planting the first enduring English settlement in North America. Simultaneously, trade routes to India expanded under the charter of the East India Company in 1610, marking the nascent steps of what would become the British Empire. Yet despite these glimmers of overseas promise, James's domestic rule struggled with financial strains. His courtly expenditures, banquets, masques, and lavish patronage swelled royal debt, while disputes over taxation and royal prerogative festered within Parliament's halls. On March 27, 1625, after a reign of 22 years under 2 titles and 3 realms, James I died at Theobald's house. His health, weakened by gout and exhaustion from governance, gave way quietly in the early dawn. He passed the sceptre to his son, Charles I, who would inherit both the crown and the mounting conflicts between Crown and Commons. Thus closed the chapter on James's attempt to bind England and Scotland under a single throne, an ambition first whispered by his grandfather Henry VII in the mists of medieval war. The seeds he planted in unity, scripture, and empire would sprout tumultuous blooms under Charles's rule. Blooms that in time would wither amid civil war and crisis, echoing the fragile dreams of a dynasty ever seeking to reconcile power with peace. King Charles I ascended the throne on March 27, 1625, in the soft dawn light of Theobald's house. He inherited a crown already burdened by his father's debts and his nation's uneasy unity. Charles believed fervently in the divine right of kings, that monarchs were appointed by God and answerable to him alone. Under this conviction, he sought to expand royal prerogative and assert his authority over Parliament and the Church. Almost immediately, tensions simmered beneath the surface. Charles levied taxes without parliamentary consent, compelling landowners and merchants to pay ship money, a levy traditionally reserved for coastal defence. When Parliament objected, he dissolved it in March 1629, entering what became known as the 11 Years' Tyranny. During this long period without a sitting Parliament, Charles ruled through royal proclamations and the Star Chamber, sidelining the Commons and stifling political dissent. More urgent still was his tightening grip on the Church of England. He appointed bishops who favoured elaborate ceremonies and ornate vestments, reviving rituals many Puritans deemed too papist. In Scotland, the attempt to impose the English Book of Common Prayer triggered open revolt in 1639. Scottish Covenanters rose as one, rejecting royal interference in their Presbyterian worship. To fund an army against his rebellious northern subjects, Charles summoned Parliament in April 1640, hoping for subsidies. Instead, the Commons demanded redress of grievances before granting any funds. Frustrated, Charles dissolved Parliament again in August 1640, only to reconvene it in November. This pattern of summons and dissolution earned that assembly the nickname the Useless Parliament. By January 16, 1641, Charles had no choice but to yield and retain the assembly. Yet the breach was deepening. Each side viewed the other's concessions as weakness. Complaints over taxation, religion, and legal abuses grew more strident, filling the Commons' petitions with calls to restrain the king's powers. Charles, unmoved by pleas, pushed back with more proclamations, and Parliament retorted by asserting its right to control the military and the treasury. Inevitably, the friction erupted into open conflict. On August 22, 1642, Charles raised his royal standard at Nottingham, declaring his intention to quell rebellion. Thus began the English Civil War, pitting the royalists known as Cavaliers against the parliamentarians, or Roundheads. The Roundheads, led by Sir Thomas Fairfax and later by Oliver Cromwell, formed the new model army in 1645, a disciplined force sworn not to the king's person but to Parliament's cause. At the Battle of Naseby on June 14, 1645, Cromwell's cavalry broke the royalist lines and Charles's cause faltered. By May 1646, the king was in custody, first by Parliament and then by the army. In the winter of 1648, he escaped custody but was recaptured at Southwell. In the wake of protracted negotiations and mounting divisions, the decision was made to try Charles for treason. On January 30, 1649, he was brought to Whitehall. With a measured farewell to life, and with courage that some say shone like a dying ember at dawn, he was beheaded on the scaffold outside Banqueting House. He became the first English monarch ever lawfully executed. Following his death, the realm was declared a republic, known as the Commonwealth of England. Oliver Cromwell rose to prominence, ultimately being named Lord Protector in 1653. The Stuarts remained in exile, their hopes of restoration flickering like distant stars. Yet the Commonwealth endured only a decade. On May 29, 1660, known ever after as Oak Apple Day, General George Monk led a delegation that restored the monarchy. Charles II returned triumphantly to London, crowned king on April 23, 1661, reviving the royal court with glittering masks, sumptuous banquets, and the pageantry of a Christmas season unmatched since his father's reign. Even as Charles II rebuilt the crown's stature, old wounds festered. Catholics remained suspect, and the Anglican Church stood vigilant against nonconformists. Parliament split into factions, Whigs and Tories, each vying to shape the monarchy's future. Charles himself balanced on a careful compromise, upholding royal privilege while yielding enough to Parliament to keep his realm intact. In the quiet hush that followed these turbulent years, the legacy of Charles I's rule, his divine right fervour, and his fatal clashes with Parliament cast long shadows across his grandson's reign, reminding all that power untempered by counsel may yet lead a kingdom into its own twilight. Upon the death of King Charles II, on February 6, 1685, the English throne passed without question to his younger brother, James, Duke of York, who ascended as James II. Unlike his brother, James was a devout Catholic, and he openly favoured the Pope in matters of church and state. His attempts to appoint fellow Catholics to high office and to grant religious freedom to his co-religionists roused profound alarm among the predominantly Protestant Parliament and populace. Whispers of popish plots drifted through the streets, and many feared that Parliament's hard-won liberties would give way to a revival of Rome's authority. Matters came to a head in June 1688, when James's second wife, Mary of Modena, bore a son, James Francis Edward Stuart, thus displacing his Protestant daughter Mary as heir. The birth inflamed the nation's anxieties, for it suggested an enduring Catholic dynasty. In November of that year, 7 prominent members of Parliament extended an extraordinary invitation to William of Orange, Mary's husband and James's nephew by marriage, to intervene for the public good of these kingdoms. William landed at Torbay on November 5, 1688, with a modest force and widespread popular support. James II, faced with little loyalty among his troops, and hearing the cheers greeting William's approach, chose flight over resistance. On December 11th, 1688, he boarded a small vessel at Sheerness and fled to France, seeking refuge under the protection of King Louis XIV. His departure, bloodless, swift, and unopposed, became known as the Glorious Revolution. In February 1689, Parliament declared that James had abdicated by deserting his people, and they offered the crowns jointly to William and his wife Mary, who accepted under the condition that they rule in partnership with Parliament. The co-regency of William and Mary marked the birth of constitutional monarchy in Britain. On April 13th, 1689, at Westminster Abbey, they took their oaths before a cheering crowd. Parliament followed with the Bill of Rights later that year, formally limiting royal prerogative. No longer could the monarch suspend laws or levy taxes without parliamentary consent, and no Catholic could ever sit on the throne. Religious freedoms for Protestant dissenters were also expanded, though those of Catholics remained curtailed. Mary's untimely death from smallpox on December 28, 1694, left William to rule alone until Parliament invited Mary's elder sister, Anne, to succeed him. Although 10 years Mary's senior, Anne had served loyally alongside her sister and maintained cordial relations with leading politicians. When William died at Kensington Palace on March 8, 1702, Anne became Queen at the age of 47. Queen Anne's reign saw the formal union of England and Scotland under the Acts of Union in 1707, creating the Kingdom of Great Britain. Yet she bore no surviving children. Her 17 pregnancies ended in miscarriage or infant death. On August 1, 1701, Parliament had passed the Act of Settlement to ensure a Protestant succession. When Anne herself died on August 1, 1714, coincidentally exactly 1 century after the birth of her great-grandfather James I, the Stuart line in England came to a close. By the terms of the Act of Settlement, the crown passed to George, Elector of Hanover, a great-grandson of James I, ushering in the House of Hanover. Though the new dynasty upheld the Protestant succession, the political and religious divisions of the past continued to echo through Parliament's chambers. The Whigs and Tories crystallised as opposing factions, each shaping debates over the limits of royal authority and the rights of subjects. Over the course of the 18th century, this system of party politics and parliamentary supremacy would evolve into Britain's modern constitutional framework, a legacy born of revolutions, restorations and reforms, all rooted in the Tudor and Stuart quests to balance crown and commons. Thus concluded the dramatic saga of the Stuarts in England, from the exuberant court of Charles II through the upheavals of James II, the joint reign of William and Mary, and the final days of Queen Anne. Their intertwined fates, marked by faith, ambition, and political compromise, laid the groundwork for the United Kingdom we know today, a nation shaped by the restless currents of power, protest, and the enduring promise of parliamentary rule. In the quiet hush of history's turning pages, the Tudor and Stuart dynasties stand as testament to the power of bloodlines, treaties, and faith. It was Henry VII who, on August 22, 1485, first wove a fragile tapestry of peace between two warring houses. His marriage to Elizabeth of York bound the White Rose of York to the Red Rose of Lancaster, giving rise to 7 children whose births and losses shaped the very soul of England. Through this calculated union, Henry laid the cornerstone for what would become the Union of the Crowns, an aspiration that would only be fully realised nearly 118 years later. His daughters, Margaret and Mary Tudor, emerged from this cradle of dynastic hope and sorrow, each bearing the weight of political marriages that would carry them far from their native land. Margaret, at 13 years old, crossed the border to marry James IV of Scotland on August 28, 1502, sealing a century and a half of enmity. Mary Tudor, crowned briefly as Queen of France at 18 on October 9, 1514, returned home in widowhood to find love and scandal in the arms of Charles Brandon, Duke of Suffolk. Their boldly concealed marriage in the autumn of 1515, and the king's reluctant pardon exacted in a fine of £24,000, became the stuff of whispered legend. Across the sea, in the corridors of Holyrood and the courts of France, Mary Stuart, daughter of Margaret, watched from afar, her heart set on restoring her lineage to glory. Born December 8, 1542, in Linlithgow Palace, she returned to Scotland at 13 with a steely resolve to uphold her faith and her crown. Her marriage to Lord Darnley on July 29, 1566, and her later, ill-fated union with Bothwell, in May 1567, sparked rebellion that led to her forced abdication on July 24, 1567. Locked within the grim walls of Loch Leven, she surrendered her crown to her infant son, James VI. Once freed by a daring escape on May 2, 1568, Mary crossed into England, only to find refuge turned to captivity under Queen Elizabeth I. For over 18 years, she remained a symbol of Catholic resistance, at the centre of plots such as the Babington Plot of 1586, until her final dawn on February 8, 1587, at Fotheringhay Castle, where she met the scaffold for the crime of treason. Her son, raised in the dappled light of Scottish courts and steeped in the teachings of Henry VIII, would one day unite the thrones of two nations. In the spring of 1603, on May 1st, he was crowned James I of England, closing the chapter that Henry VII had begun. His reign saw the publication of the authorised King James Bible in 1611, the thwarting of the Gunpowder Plot led by Guy Fawkes in 1605, and the planting of Jamestown in Virginia in 1609. Yet even as he fostered a literary and colonial golden age, his disputes with Parliament sowed seeds that would bloom into conflict under his son. Charles I, crowned on March 27, 1625, championed the doctrine of the divine right of kings and ruled without Parliament for 11 years. His attempts to impose Anglican forms on Scotland ignited rebellion in 1639, and his reliance on ship money, without parliamentary approval, stoked ire at home. When civil war erupted in August 1642, he faced Oliver Cromwell's New Model Army, and after defeats at battles such as Naseby on June 14, 1645, was brought to trial and beheaded on January 30, 1649, an unprecedented fall of a reigning monarch. For a decade, the Commonwealth under Cromwell governed Britain as a republic, only for the Stuarts to be restored in May 1660. Charles II returned in triumph, ruling a restored monarchy laced with lavish court life, yet shadowed by continued religious tension. His death on February 6, 1685, ushered in his Catholic brother James II, whose attempts to favour his co-religionists led to the Glorious Revolution in November 1688. William of Orange and Mary, daughter of James II, were proclaimed joint monarchs under conditions set by Parliament, establishing a constitutional monarchy that curtailed royal prerogative and enshrined parliamentary supremacy in the Bill of Rights of 1689. When Mary died childless on December 28, 1694, her sister Anne ascended the throne, overseeing the Acts of Union in 1707 that formally united England and Scotland into the Kingdom of Great Britain. Yet Anne's own death on August 1, 1714, without surviving issue, ended the Stuart line in England, and the crown passed to the House of Hanover under the Act of Settlement of 1701. Thus, from the calculated marriage of Henry VII to the loss of the Stuarts under Anne, 1,000 tales of sorrow and ambition have unfurled in quiet courts and thunderous battlefields alike. The story of Margaret and Mary Tudor is but a single thread in this vast tapestry, one woven through dynastic alliance, religious conflict, and the inexorable advance toward constitutional governance. In their wake, they left the foundations of the United Kingdom we know today, a realm born of roses and regicide, of treaty and turmoil, now held together by the delicate covenant between Crown and Parliament. In the languid summer of 1553, a sombre cloud drifted over the Tudor realm when King Edward VI, only son of Henry VIII, breathed his last on the 6th of July, 1553. At the mere age of 15, Edward succumbed to the wasting chill of tuberculosis, leaving no male heir to inherit the crown. In the silent hush of his final days at Greenwich Palace, he penned his last injunction. The throne should not pass to his Catholic half-sister, Princess Mary Tudor, but to his cousin's daughter, Lady Jane Grey, then but 16 years old. This extraordinary decree, intended to preserve the Protestant establishment he so ardently championed, flew in the face of the ancient law of primogeniture against the tradition of elder sons and daughters, claiming rights of succession and stoked fierce debate among nobles and commoners alike. Within hours of Edward's passing, courtiers moved swiftly. On the 10th of July, 1553, in the austere Great Hall of the Tower of London, Lady Jane Grey was proclaimed Queen. Clad in a gown of brocade and velvet, she knelt as the heralds read her coronation commission, her soft voice scarcely louder than the whisper of prayer. Yet her reign, destined to be fleeting, rested only on parchment and the king's dying admonition. Beyond those stone walls, Mary Tudor marshalled her own forces, gathering supporters who longed for a return to the old faith and the lineage of Henry VIII's first marriage. Jane's rule came to be known as the 9 Days Queenship. Although she bore the crown in name, her authority held little sway in ballrooms or council chambers. Every declaration she made required the acquiescence of powerful lords, torn between loyalty to Edward's memory and their own Catholic sympathies. Meanwhile, Mary's supporters, both noble and plebeian, marched through country lanes and flooded into London. Their banners, bearing the red Tudor rose, stirred the hearts of many who had grown weary of the new regime's protracted uncertainty. By the 19th of July, barely 9 days after Jane's ascension, Mary Tudor's forces stood at the very gates of the Tower. Gentlefolk and merchants lined the streets with quilts and banners, whispering prayers for the Catholic Queen's return. Mary's arrival was met with cheers that rolled like distant thunder, as the ancient church bells of London tolled in celebration. Jane and her fiancé, Guildford Dudley, himself a duke, and one of Edward's appointed protectors, were lodged once more within the Tower's grim confines and charged with high treason. In the shifting light of late July, Jane's fate seemed sealed. Mary, crowned Mary I on the same day that Jane's tiny reign ended, sought to quell the lingering hopes of Protestant rebels. Yet the new queen delayed the execution of young Jane. Through the autumn's golden haze and the hush of winter's first frost, Jane lingered on death row, her sleep broken by the distant clang of the Tower gates and the faint murmur of prayers for her soul. At length, in the pale February dawn, the final act unfolded. On the 12th of February, 1554, Lady Jane Grey, now 16, was led to the scaffold within the Tower precincts. She wore a simple gown of grey wool, her hair bound neatly beneath a linen kerchief. As the executioner's block was set before her, Jane knelt with composed serenity, her pale cheeks touched by the morning chill. With a whispered prayer for mercy, she laid her head upon the block. In a single, muffled stroke, the life of England's briefest monarch ended, and the Tudor line's rightful succession was restored. Thus closed the poignant chapter of the 9 Days Queen. Jane Grey's brief coronation and her tragic end underscored the fragile interplay of law, faith, and dynastic ambition. Her memory, carried on by those who mourned her untimely death, became a quiet testament to the perils of political machination, a lullaby of caution in the grand, turbulent saga of Tudor England. Mary I, daughter of Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon, ascended the English throne on July 17, 1553, marking the beginning of a 5-year reign that would seal her infamous sobriquet, Bloody Mary. From the hush of her coronation at Westminster Abbey, she moved with solemn purpose to restore Roman Catholic authority in England. Within months, she repealed the Protestant reforms enacted under her father and half-brother, and in April 1554 she reunited the English Church with Rome, acknowledging the Pope's supremacy over ecclesiastical matters. Yet it was not with gentle persuasion that Mary enforced her faith. Over the course of her reign, more than 280 Protestant dissenters were condemned for heresy and executed, often by burning at the stake in public squares from London to Oxford. These burnings began in February 1554 and continued intermittently until late 1557, casting a grim pall over Christendom in England. Each execution was met with hushed crowds. Some wept for the condemned, others threw stones at the pyres, and many more looked on in horrified fascination. The severity of Mary's campaign instilled deep fear among her subjects, and seeded resentment that would bloom in the reigns to come. On July 25, 1554, Mary fortified her political alliance with Spain by marrying Philip II, King of Spain, at Winchester Cathedral. Philip, then 30 years old, arrived in England under an agreement that he would serve as king consort, but hold no sovereign power independent of Mary's. The union was deeply unpopular. English Protestants feared subservience to foreign and papal interests, and even some Catholic peers grumbled that England's independence was imperiled. Though Mary hoped for an heir to cement the alliance, the marriage remained childless. In January 1555, Philip departed for Spain to attend to his own affairs, leaving Mary to contend with the twin burdens of crown and conscience in isolation. By the autumn of 1557, Mary's health had begun to wane. She suffered recurrent tremors and bouts of fever, which physicians of the day attributed to both heart failure and a return of the sweating sickness that had claimed her sister Catherine's life centuries earlier. Yet she persevered in governance, issuing pardons in the hope of national reconciliation. On November 17, 1558, Mary I died quietly at St. James's Palace. She was 37 years old. In her final moments, she requested a general amnesty for those who had opposed her religious policies, an act of grace that acknowledged the globe of sorrow her prosecutions had ignited. Mary's legacy is a tapestry of contrasts. She briefly restored Catholicism and realigned England with continental Christendom, instituted reforms in administration and the legal system, and championed cautious infrastructural improvements. Yet her reign also deepened sectarian divides and left a bitter memory of persecution in the public consciousness. When her half-sister Elizabeth I succeeded her, the pendulum swung swiftly back to Protestantism, but the scars of Mary's burning times would linger for generations. In the quiet aftermath of her passing, one hears both the echo of solemn prayers for her soul and the whispered lament of a kingdom forever changed by the fate of its Bloody Mary. VIII. Elizabeth I, daughter of Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn, ascended the English throne on November 17, 1558, at the age of 25. Her coronation in Westminster Abbey was a measured affair, tempered by remembrance of her sister Mary's turbulent reign. But from that moment, Elizabeth moved with deliberate grace to steer England into a new era of stability and prosperity, what history would come to call the Golden Age. One of her first acts was the passage of the Elizabethan religious settlement. In the spring of 1559, Parliament enacted the Act of Supremacy, declaring Elizabeth Supreme Governor of the Church of England, and the Act of Uniformity, mandating a revised Book of Common Prayer. These measures forged a middle way. English worship would be conducted in English, with liturgy that blended traditional Catholic ceremony and Protestant preaching. The settlement preserved the episcopal hierarchy and many familiar rituals, yet affirmed the monarch's authority over spiritual as well as temporal matters. By balancing theological differences with pragmatic governance, Elizabeth quelled much of the sectarian strife that had marked her sister's reign. Under Elizabeth's steady hand, England's fortunes rose both at sea and abroad. In July 1588, the Spanish Armada, over 130 ships, strong set sail to invade England. Under the command of Sir Francis Drake and Lord Charles Howard, the English fleet engaged the Armada in a series of skirmishes off Plymouth and along the Channel. On August 8, 1588, and again on August 28, the Armada was driven off by superior English seamanship and fierce storms. Its defeat marked England's emergence as a dominant naval power. Simultaneously, England's merchants and explorers expanded the realm's reach across the Atlantic. In May 1587, Sir Walter Raleigh obtained a royal charter to colonize Virginia, and in April 1597, he dispatched the ship Delight to establish a settlement at Roanoke, though that venture would tragically vanish by 1591. Nevertheless, these early attempts laid the groundwork for future colonies that would flourish in the 17th century. Back at home, Elizabeth's court became the epicenter of cultural renewal. She patronized playwrights and poets who captured the English language at its zenith. William Shakespeare, born in 1564, penned his earliest works in the mid-1590s, while Christopher Marlowe produced his stirring dramas in the same decade. Court masques, planted gardens, and lavish entertainments beneath the gazes of silken banners filled the hallways of Whitehall Palace and Kenilworth Castle. Elizabeth herself delighted in music and dance, often joining the dancers herself in private gatherings, her laughter echoing softly like a lullaby in the candle-lit night. Despite her numerous marriage proposals from foreign princes and domestic nobles, Elizabeth chose to remain single. She famously styled herself as the Virgin Queen, weaving a powerful symbol of independence and loyalty to her realms. Her decision not to marry allowed her to negotiate alliances, offering her hand, in theory, as diplomatic leverage while preserving absolute authority over her own throne. For 45 years, until her death on March 24, 1603, Elizabeth guided England through wars and plots with measured resolve. She navigated challenges, both domestic such as the Essex Rebellion of 1599, when Robert Devereux, Earl of Essex, marched on London and was swiftly subdued, and foreign, like the ongoing rivalry with Spain, and intermittent skirmishes with Scottish Highland clans. When, at last, Elizabeth lay dying at Richmond Palace, she was 69 years old. With no children to inherit, she bequeathed the crown to her closest Protestant relative, James VI of Scotland, her cousin once removed, and the great-grandson of her aunt Margaret Tudor. On March 1st, 1603, James VI added England to his Scottish title, becoming James I of England and uniting the crowns in a personal union. His accession fulfilled Elizabeth's final act as Queen, ensuring a peaceful transition and the continued stability of the Protestant succession. Thus closed the Tudor era, a dynasty born in conflict and crowned in concord. Elizabeth I's reign stands as a testament to the power of moderation, the creative spirit, and the quiet authority of a monarch who chose to rule through compromise rather than coercion. In her death, she ushered in the Stuart era, and with it, a new chapter in the unfolding story of the British Isles. On the 24th of March, 1603, as a pale spring sun filtered through the windows of Richmond Palace, the last Tudor monarch, Elizabeth I, quietly breathed her final breath. Word carried swiftly to Edinburgh, where James VI of Scotland, already 37 years old, received the news that he was now also James I of England and Ireland. In that hushed moment, the union of the crowns was born. Though Scotland and England would continue to sit in separate parliaments and maintain distinct legal systems, the person of the monarch now symbolized a new political reality. Two kingdoms bound by a single sovereign, moving irresistibly toward closer union. James I, stepping into his dual thrones at Whitehall on May 1st, 1603, carried with him the scholarly temperament of a monarch nurtured in the Scottish court. He immediately began to champion learning and the arts, surrounding himself with poets, philosophers, and theologians. In 1611, he authorized a new translation of the Bible into English, what we now call the King James Version, tasking a committee of over 50 scholars to render the scriptures into stately yet sonorous prose. This monumental work would echo through centuries as the definitive sacred text for the English-speaking world, its cadences shaping both worship and literature. Yet, even as James celebrated the glories of scholarship, the shadow of his ancestors' dynastic struggles lingered. He inherited a crown that had long asserted divine right prerogatives, yet he also faced an English parliament increasingly resolved to defend its own privileges. The same tensions that had tested Henry VII's careful diplomacy and that had driven Margaret Tudor and Mary Tudor into tragic marriages now surfaced on a grander stage. James's habit of granting monopolies and dispensing patronage without parliamentary grant of subsidy stoked unease among the commons. His calls for union of the kingdoms, though visionary, were met with caution. Many MPs feared that the balance of local autonomy and royal authority might slip from their grasp. Beneath the courteous veneer of Jacobean court life lay a brewing conflict. Parliament pressed for redress of grievances before approving James's requests for new taxes. James, confident in his divine appointment, countered that royal prerogative must not be unduly constrained. These disputes, at times marked by sharp rhetoric in the House of Commons, foreshadowed the greater rupture that would engulf the realm under his son Charles I. The seeds of what would become the English Civil War over ship money, religious uniformity, and the limits of taxation were sown in the early years of James's reign. Still, the union of the crowns stood as a testament to the far-reaching design first sketched by Henry VII when he bound Lancaster and York, and later extended by Margaret Tudor, whose marriage had sought to bridge England and Scotland. That distant accord had faded into conflict and sorrow, only to be imagined anew in James's accession. The union of the two realms under one crown created a dynastic framework that would ultimately lead, over the coming century, to an Act of Union and the formal creation of Great Britain in 1707. In the quiet sleep of history's unfolding, the legacies of two Tudor sisters, Margaret, whose bridal voyage to Holyrood sealed an early peace, and Mary, whose own trials in France and England, echoed with both tragedy and defiance, can be seen in the very fabric of James's reign. Their stories of dynastic marriage, political alliance, and personal sacrifice laid the foundations upon which the Stuart monarch would stand. Though the formal union of parliaments lay still in the future, the union of the crowns in 1603 marked the first breath of a new polity, one drawn from the bloodlines and bold gambits of Tudor ambition. now carried forward by a Stuart dynasty destined to shape the modern British state. And so, as our journey through the lives of Henry VIII's three remarkable sisters, Margaret Tudor, Mary Tudor of France and Suffolk, and Mary Stuart of Scotland, draws gently to a close, let us slow our breath and soften our thoughts. Imagine them, each in her own chamber of stone and candlelight, tracing the fine embroidery of duty and desire, the weight of crowns, and the hope of reconciliation resting ever so lightly upon their shoulders. Picture Margaret, stepping beyond the high walls of England into the heathered hills of Scotland, forging peace where swords once clashed. Mary, first a queen in foreign lands and then a duchess by choice, finding love and laughter amid the quiet halls of Westhorpe. And Mary Stuart, carried from cradle to coronation, whose spirit shone like a candle in the storm of politics and faith. In the hush of evening, let their stories drift like petals on a still pond, each tale a ripple of courage, of unspoken longings, and of resilience in the face of shattered dreams. Remember how Margaret's steady hand balanced the schemes of nobles, how Mary Tudor's warm embrace welcomed her children and stepchildren alike, and how Mary Stuart's eloquent pen and steadfast convictions left an echo in every courtly corridor she ever graced. Though they bore burdens no one their age should ever know, they carried on with grace that softened the edges of history's harder truths. Their legacy, woven from threads of blood and treaty, reminds us that even the grandest ambitions can be tempered by compassion, and that the bonds of family, whether forged by birth or by the fragile ties of marriage, hold the power to shape nations. These sisters teach us that duty need not eclipse kindness, that diplomacy can be an act of love, and that in every whispered prayer for peace, we carry forward the hope that tomorrow's dawn may be brighter than today's twilight. And now, as their images begin to blur at the edges, like ink dissolving into water, let us allow the final candle to gutter and burn low. May the hush of their stories lull your heart into quiet rest, and may the gentle cadence of their lives ease you toward dreams where roses bloom eternal, and the soft toll of distant bells guides you home. Good night, dear friends. May your sleep be deep, and your dreams be bright. And when you wake, we hope you will return to share new tales and timeless wonders. If you found comfort in their journeys, please subscribe to our channel for more stories whispered in the gentle shadows, stories to cradle you into peaceful slumber and awaken you to the promise of a new day. Sleep well,